So this could be a really big turning point for Israel, the Middle East, what Trump has just said. Something I've been suggesting, and we've been saying on this channel for a while, but what he's just said about what he proposes to do in Gaza is potentially a game changer. I want to play to you his words. Have a listen closely because it's a little bit unclear because it's taken on Air Force One. Have a watch.
I'm talking to General El-Sisi tomorrow, sometime I believe, and I'd like Egypt to take people, and I'd like Jordan to take people. You're talking about probably 1.5 million people, and we just clean out that whole thing. It's over the centuries that's many conflicts that site, and I don't know. It's something has to happen, but it's literally a demolition site right now. Almost everything's demolished, and people are dying there. So I'd rather get involved with some of the Arab nations and build housing in a different location where they can maybe live in peace for a change.
Temporarily, or would they
It could be either. It could be temporarily, could be long term.
So he's saying that Trump is saying he wants to look at relocating Gazans to Jordan and Egypt, and he's going to be speaking with them about that. He said it could be temporary, it could be permanent, but what he knows for sure is that that a huge amount of Gaza has been demolished, and that this place has seen so much violence for so long. Now let's unpack this, because what he's saying, you could not begin to imagine another American president saying such a thing, having the audacity to say it. Audacity can be a good thing. Let's unpack this for a bit, unpack his words, unpack what he's saying, because he's clearly shown himself as someone that's prepared to think outside of the box. First of all, let's just think purely from the Arab side, from the Arabs' point of view. Gaza, since Israel vacated Gaza, it was, in 2005, it was under Israeli occupation since 1967. Before that, Egypt was control of it, but they didn't give the Arabs living there freedom of movement, and certainly didn't give them statehood or didn't give them Egyptian citizenship. They had a bad time there. By the way, proving that the Arab countries aren't really so interested in giving Palestinian statehood, as they're more just interested in trying to get rid of Israel, the Jewish state. But anyway, since Israel left in 2005, Hamas were voted in, and they have been causing terrorism to Israel since then. And there's been lots of wars and lots of bloodshed and hostages, and culminating in October 7th and the aftermath. So it's been constant wars. So what are we suggesting? Are we suggesting that what's been proposed is about $80 billion of reconstruction funds are going to be required to rebuild Gaza? Now, by the way, why are 55% of the homes demolished and buildings demolished? Not because Israel is genocidal maniacs, because Israel knows that Hamas were hiding and using 55% of civilian buildings for weapon storage, for fighting, for booby traps, for housing munitions and militants. So the genocidal maniacs are Hamas, and that's why it's such a mess. And this really, October 7th and its aftermath, was a culmination of this battle and this fighting. So what's going to happen? They reinvest $80 billion. Now, Hamas are running a dictatorship, basically. So they're going to run the show, and it'll be rebuilt. And what will they do? They'll use it to plan more terror attacks. There's going to be more violence. You can forget this idea that's going to be living in peace side by side. That's absurd. Let's also acknowledge the fact that Hamas has majority support still among the people. That's according to recent polling. Between 70 to 80% still support Hamas, what they did on October 7th. It's not just a government, it's also a people that seem to glorify this kind of terrorism. So let's just say that Gaza's rebuilt. That, I'm sure Trump is smart enough to realize that money's going to go down the tube. Alternatively, you rehouse them and they live in Jordan, Egypt. And, it turns out there's actually about 400,000 families. If you were to divide that money the 80 billion to 400,000, it means each family could get about $200,000 per family. They could start a new life with that. By the way, I'm not even saying that I support, or it's my business to be involved in having any support for the kind of refinancing of the people of Gaza. As far as I'm concerned, this is an enemy of the Jewish people. The majority of them, I wish it weren't the case, I lament this, the majority of them support Israel's destruction, the Jewish people's destruction. That's what it seems from polling. I'm sure many of them could be persuaded differently. I know that could be the case, because you have Israeli Arabs who are cooperative, and Arabs aren't inherently going to be anti-Jewish, but that is the case it is right now. So if you've got a people who are supporting the genocide against me, I'm not particularly interested in, crying many tears over the fact that if you did support Hamas, if you are against, I do support what happened on October 7th, the fact that Israel's had to retaliate and you're suffering as a result of that. I'm sorry, welcome to what happens when you hate. I lament it. I lament it all. I wish there were no suffering. I wish there were no violence. But me getting excited about funding going towards people who hate me and will my destruction, I'm not going to get that excited by it. But nonetheless, okay, fine. That money goes to them. Surely it makes more sense if you house them in Jordan or Egypt, then they're more likely to... Well, they're not inside of Israel or next to Israel, and they're just getting on with their lives, and they're not part of they're under a different government, the Egyptian or Jordanian government, who have peace treaties with Israel. Surely that's going to bode much better. Israel's tried for 100 years to have a two-state solution, but the Arabs have shown themselves time and again they're not actually interested in statehood. If they were, this would have been sorted 100 years ago. What they're interested in is getting rid of the Jewish state, throwing the Jews into the sea. So it seems to me that I lament the fact that they haven't accepted to live side by side with us, to have two groups of people. But fine, they don't want to do that. Israel's not going to lay down its weapons. Israel isn't going anywhere. Well then, the other solution that Trump is now proposing is, you consider yourselves Arabs and part of the Arab world, so let's move you to the Arab world. This actually could solve the whole Israeli-Palestinian issue. Again, Israel's tried for a century to say, if you really want self-determination, you really want statehood, we'll agree to it. They agreed to it time and time again. The Arabs kept rejecting it. And before you say, well, they think the whole land is theirs, then why... In 1948, when they tried to destroy the Jewish state, why did they not look at creating their own Palestinian state? If they would have won, God forbid, in 1948, Egypt would have a chunk of the land, Jordan would have a chunk of the land, Lebanon would have a chunk of the land, Syria would have a chunk. There'd be no Palestinian states. And this is not about self-determination. Likewise, between 48 to 67, Egypt controlled Gaza, Jordan controlled Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. They didn't try and create a Palestinian state there. So hopefully Trump can understand that this whole thing's phony, and that actually the way you solve this is to say you're not actually interested in sovereignty and self-determination, because you'd be happy to be part of another Arab state. So if you consider yourself Arabs, go live in the Arab world. Arabs are not indigenous to Judea. Again, I lament all this. It would be much easier, much less violent if they chose to live in peace with the Jews, with Israel. Be much more peaceful. Whether it were two states, whether it were they living in a Jewish state. If you choose war and violence and genocide against the Jews, well, we're going to have to pick a tougher resolution to this. It's just the way it's going to be. Sorry. So actually, what Trump is suggesting here could be a total game changer, because once you shift the demographics as well, then the issue can become better. And let's also be clear that even if these are people who hate our guts, the fact that they can potentially live in peace in another part of the world and not bother the Jewish people anymore, and they can have a better life, great, fine. Hopefully they can still continue to watch JTV and we can start to change their views ideologically as well. But in the meantime, Let's make sure they don't pose a threat to us from a security standpoint. If someone on an individual level, I'm open to the idea, says I'm happy to live next to the Jews or in a Jewish state or in a Gaza where we can live side by side, I think, maybe you could look at that on an individual level, but in some ways, the majority has blown it. The majority of Arabs, certainly in Gaza, have blown it because they have chosen time and again and support time and again an ideology that is modern-day Nazi-esque. So what Trump's suggesting could really be a massive game changer. And frankly, he should understand, and anyone sane should understand, it's going to be a complete waste of money to rebuild Gaza, only for it to Hamas to attempt to redo what they did on October 7th, God forbid. Let's also acknowledge the other reality, that from a historical point of view, from an indigeneity point of view, from a biblical point of view, and a spiritual point of view, and by the way, even from a legal point of view, Gaza is Jewish. It's a Jewish people's homeland, and I tell you what, we've given the other side enough chances to run it, and they've run it into the ground. It's a beautiful plot of land. Now it should be Israel's turn. It should be Israel's turn to make it flourish. So, I guess, TBC, to be continued. Let's see what happens. But I think this, as radical as it may sound, for everyone involved, is pointing towards a better long-term solution for peace and prosperity for all. Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.